remember incredible emotion. There were people everywhere. People crying, people angry. And I was going to have a joint meeting of the Group 14 group to work out what was next. Walking through the seething mass of people, there were media everywhere. Two things I remember. One was, in the middle of all of this anger and emotion, somebody handed me a fake newspaper headline. And it made me laugh, and I thought, this is so Australian. Somebody had, in that hour or whatever it had taken, had bodged up this fake newspaper headline saying, Souths to merge with East Timor. And I thought, that's pretty funny in the middle of all of this.
Souths President George Piggins intends to continue his fight against the NRL and News Limited.
And then you subpoena them, and then you get them to open the books and you see who's been fair dinkum.
One of the most famous clubs of all, South Sydney. 20 premierships. In a battle for survival.
We're not going to go away. We're going to ride this storm and we're going to stick at it.
We all went to the Leagues Club. There was no noise. There was hundreds of people there. No one was talking. Everyone was just low-key. Everyone didn't have a smile on their face. No one was just like, I was trying to look for action. I was trying to get people like, you know, crying, hugging or talking things. And then we saw they had a big screen and we had all the cameramen there. We had officials there, Souths officials all there. And then when the decision came that said Souths are kicked out, oh man, that was the saddest day. Everyone was crying. A lot of people were very angry, screaming at the screen, telling the screen off.
I was crying. That's what I was doing. We went to the club, and it was profoundly sad. It was a tragic afternoon. There wasn't a person who wasn't crying that day.
I was in the Heritage Hotel, as it was called then, in Brisbane, and I got a phone call. I can't even remember who called me. And then someone said, we're out, and I turned the news on, and that's the last thing I really remember that day. I think the minibar bill was shocking. Yeah, that was shit. That was shit.
When I heard that Souths had been kicked out, I agreed with George Piggins totally and just said, look, if Souths don't come back, then I'm out of rugby league. I have no interest in rugby league. I'll go and follow rugby union or go and follow Aussie rules or something else. But my days of loving rugby league are over if Souths aren't involved.
The day after we got kicked out, it was an overcast day. We were all depressed. The weather reflected our mood. We went into the boardroom. We had no money, no prospect, virtually nothing. We didn't have a football team, we didn't have a club.
You know, being a South junior coming through, you know, you strive to play the first grade and realising that there's no first grader on top of you, ahead of you, so you're playing your junior football for, you know, Harold Matthews, SG Ball, not knowing what your future's going to be like if you keep succeeding through the ranks. You don't know where your pathway lies. You know, after that season, Souths got kicked out and everyone else had to find another club.
I remember when we were told, everyone was just sort of in disbelief a little bit, like whether or not this was real or what was happening, and then, you know, it all just sunk in, and obviously it was in the paper and everything like that, and I just remember people absolutely shattered about it. And for us as footy players, a lot of us lost our jobs, basically. I actually signed with Souths for another 3 seasons in 1999. But unfortunately that contract was null and void because Souths got kicked out of the comp, and I signed with Cronulla after the end of the season. So they still had a bit of room in the salary cap, and I was, like I said, I was one of the lucky ones to actually get a start with another club. A lot of the boys unfortunately didn't, which was very, very sad.
I don't know whether we're going to be around or not, but you know, the fight's far from over as far as I'm concerned. You know, 2 blokes, other clubs coming and Frankie's over the next couple of weeks. I can't stand in your way.
I was actually at the Channel 9 studios in Artarmon. So they called me up and said, oh, look, what are you doing on this day at this time? Would you be available to come and do an interview when it comes out and we just get your response? And I said, yeah, sure, no problem. Because I honestly thought that, you know, there's no way that they could kick the South Sydney Rabbitohs out. There's no way. So I was actually quite confident. I'd already signed a 3-year deal to stay at the Rabbitohs probably a month beforehand. Then all of a sudden the news broke and I was in the TV studio with the camera on me and I just had no idea what I was going to say.
I mean, I can't believe that South Sydney aren't going to be in the competition next year, but I think I just have to, first of all, I've got to get over this and then start focusing on my future now.
It was a massive shock for me. And I was effectively, from that point on, in no man's land because I didn't have a team. Well, I had a contract with the Rabbitohs for 3 years, but I didn't have a team to play for. In the space of a month, I had to find a new team somewhere. And the following year, which was 2000, they brought the season forward because of the Olympics. And I was carrying a shoulder injury as well, an AC injury. So I effectively had like a 1.5 month off season, which was an absolute disaster for me for the following year.
Your guess is as good as mine.
Those house were done, and I was actually talking to Eddie Jones at ACT Rugby Union. I was talking to Wayne Bennett at the Broncos, and then Nick Politis actually got in contact with my manager. And
I say this with an unblemished history of heterosexuality. He was gorgeous. And the other thing about Wingy, he's still gorgeous.
I'd always thought that I'd go back to rugby union. I played rugby union and rugby league at school, and I loved playing rugby union. I always thought I'd go back, but I knew the time wasn't right for me. These were tough years.
Wingy was, you know, for quite some time. We had great players, but Wingy was that extra sparkle. And the media loved him. And
I flew up to Brisbane to talk to Wayne Bennett at the Broncos. He said, I saw you play Australian schoolboys at Ballymore. I know your game. I know how you're going to play. We'll sit you behind this guy and you're going to learn off him, and we've got a plan and a position for you. We want you to be a 5'8". We've got all these guys that we're going to get to mentor you. Everything that a young football player wants to hit from a coach that's most respected out of anywhere. That was that interview, and then I went to meet up with the Roosters. I didn't actually get to meet Nick, but I remember meeting up with Graham Murray, who was the new coach at the Roosters at the time, I think. And he said, I've never heard of you, I've never seen you play. The big boss, Nick Politis, wants you here. I signed up with the Roosters.
nothing hurts more than seeing a player you love go to the Roosters. In fact, even if it's a player I'm not particularly fond of, it still hurts when they go to the Roosters. You know, I'm a Rabbitohs fan. I live in the eastern suburbs, and I cop a lot of shit.
Wingy went to the Roosters, and Tricky went to the Dogs, and they all kicked off their careers and kept it going.
The process has been fair, reasonable, and consistent. Thank you.
We all went home and we thought, that's it. We're never going to have it. We're never going to see Souths again. Apparently, that wasn't enough for the South staff. They all thought to themselves, this is crap. Where did you come up with the decision from? How did you base it? What's the story? So
I was in the office when George got the call from Neil Whittaker saying that chance to play again was gone.
I understand that Cronulla have shown interest in having discussions with Souths in the past. I don't know.
And that was after they'd kept changing the rules and changing the proviso that what we had to do to get in. Like they even knocked back our sponsorship from the juniors.
I had to go to court with a Souths football jumper to show our sponsorship for Souths. We had Souths juniors for a couple of years on the back. But they tried to say that wasn't fake money, but they tried to say that wasn't sponsorship to help the football club. Well, it certainly was.
But they were artificial criteria. I'm not saying that anyone drafted them with a particular outcome in mind. They didn't take into account all the measures you would normally look at. There was no measure for durability or sustainability over that period of time. There was no measure of number of premierships won and the loss of goodwill to the competition if you excluded a club that had the most premierships. But they expected us to merge.
The most obvious merger, of course, was with arch enemies, the Roosters, and as we all know, the Rabbitohs and the Roosters just hate each other, and it's equal.
I think George went with Kerry Packer to see Nick Politis, and that's folklore.
Kerry Packer wanted Souths to merge with East. Nick Politis was at the meeting and he said, "You're here wanting us to merge our club with yours." He said, "What say would I have?" And Nick said, "None."
There'll be no red and green in the Rooster jumper.
Kerry Packer said, "Oh well, we might as well finish this meeting now, Nick. See you later." He got the shits with Nick.
George ended up telling Kerry no, and Kerry took George to Double Bay for a coffee after. He said, "Well, it's not going to happen."
It was just never going to work, and thank God it didn't. What a great rivalry it's become.
There were some people who tried to get us to Cronulla.
Now the Sharks, who have always struggled financially, have sort of always been rather weak in terms of their resources, haven't been greatly successful on the field up till then, hadn't won a comp. There was talk behind the scenes that, the Rabbitohs and the Sharks should get together.
The South Sydney Sharks? Come on.
Always said the door is open for talks if they were interested.
They tried to get us any way they could. I mean, there was some underhanded things happening. We had a lawyer come into a board meeting one night and he said, "You may as well forget it. You don't have a case or merge." And Nick Pappas happened to be an invitee in that room that night as well. And I think down the track somewhere, they worked out that this guy was a stoolie from the other side and had been sent in under. And when he left, Nick said, "Well, I remember that night so specifically." Nick said, "I think he's wrong, and I think, as a lawyer, we have a case in trade practices and restraint of trade." That guy had said half an hour before, "Merge or you're gone." I didn't know a lot of it was going on till later, and you look back and say, they were gunning for us, for sure.
They kept taking George into town to speak to these lawyers, and they were more or less telling him that he had to give it up, that his club was trading insolvently and you could lose personally. And he kept saying to me, "There's something wrong here. These people are hell-bent on taking me," this is the complete marketing people, "taking me to these solicitors that are telling me to give it up. I want to speak to lawyers that tell me we can mount a challenge."
We, and particularly me on this stage, was asked to get the juniors to leave South Sydney by prominent people and take the juniors to Cronulla. I even got picked up in a ministerial car from the juniors and taken to the minister's home, where he tried to tell me the goodness of South's juniors leaving and going to Cronulla.
I told them that if they persisted, they'd be necked. And I meant that figuratively, necked. They'd be exposed. We were going to become what the South Sydney Sharks or the Cronulla Rabbitohs. Just doesn't gel, does it? In fact, there were two people on the board who wanted us to go that way, and George wouldn't have any part of it.
We were approached, and Martin and I were among them, and we also, Martin said we'd better take our lawyer with us to this meeting.
Jerry,
Yeah.
I don't think
wait
we
a
should
minute,
go into
wait a minute. I'll let you decide whether you want to cut this in or not. But there's a lot of pressure from the NRL for us to merge with other clubs. And they put every proposition, they put millions of dollars on the table. We were saying at the time, as long as we're South Sydney, as long as we've got the Rabbit, as long as we've got the red and green, as long as we're based out of Redfern, we play as South Sydney, fill your boots, give us the money. So basically we call their bluff.
South juniors are part of South seniors till the day everybody dies. That will never, ever be changed, mate. We might have little blues from time to time, they're nothing. This was big. And the juniors were rock solid then, and they're rock solid now. And ever guess what, mate? They'll always be rock solid.
No, we wouldn't be bought off, I think that's the thing. And why we wouldn't? Because we knew we were gaining momentum during that period.
There was talk behind the scenes that, the Rabbitohs and the Sharks should get together, and that was just never even entertained, There was talk in the media that some high-profile South figures were all behind it.
There was a lot of this underhanded stuff and stories circulating that weren't true, and people's repetitions being besmirched.
The public relations campaign against us intensified to a new and dangerous level. George was accused of incompetence and corruption.
And I think it was part of the NRL agenda and the News Limited agenda to put these stories out there to try and weaken the resolve of the Rabbitohs supporters, because at the end of the day, it was the Rabbitohs supporters that kept us together.
Certainly that's the sort of thing that we were seeing in the Murdoch press and some of the other newspapers and hearing on radio about, well, come on, at least you'll survive if you amalgamate. Well, no, you don't. I mean, South Sydney is South Sydney. We're not, part Cronulla or part anybody. We're South Sydney. And so I don't think that the true believers would ever have accepted amalgamation. It's either Souths or the Bush.
We just seemed to throw everything off and just kept moving forward. And I think that happened because we had so many people behind us. In the end, everybody realised that what had happened to us was wrong.
We're pretty confident that we're united on that front, and that's the whole board, and that takes in the people you just mentioned, and I've got no problem whatsoever with them.
If I could just add that, a lot of people might say, well, why wouldn't Souths merge to survive? But as we've seen with St George Illawarra, a merger is effectively a takeover. Souths are a healthy club. Let's get that clear from the start. They've actually just killed off a healthy football club. There's nothing wrong with Souths. I'm of the opinion now that if Souths cannot win legal action, that we should retire the colours.
You ask Magpies fans, you ask Steelers fans, you ask Bears fans, you don't merge, you get taken over.
Imagine being a Balmain supporter and having to amalgamate. And St George is even worse. These days you don't hear much about Illawarra, about the Steelers. You hear about it's called St George. They're called the Dragons, but in fact, in truth, they're the Dragon Steelers. And to irritate my friends who are St George supporters, I always refer to them as the Steelers rather than the Dragons.
They got cold feet, they got really nervous and they merged, and which everybody thought was a terrible decision for the Illawarra Steelers, who was a really great, proud club from down south who had a great junior base, and all of a sudden they were forced together. And then the other one that didn't make any sense was, of course, the Balmain Tigers and the West Magpies got together. Everyone looks on and goes, how did that all happen, And so the Rabbitohs were always, and to George Piggins' credit, we're always solid from day one. We're not going to merge and we're not going to accept elimination, of course. It's the Rabbitohs, and we're going to be standalone Rabbitohs, as we were since 1908, or there'll be nothing at all. And we don't believe what you're doing is legal, and we're going to challenge it for as far as we have to.
It was so dumb for a business that was in the business of, let's call it entertainment, to tear out one of the chapters that was one of the great chapters from the book. Like, why would you do that? That's why I thought it was so stupid getting rid of Norse. Here was a club that hadn't won the premiership for 60 years, and every year you'd turn around and go, might this be the year? Why would you kill that storyline off? It's such a great storyline.
We even forget about them. They were forced to merge with Manly, who they hated each other. The Northern Eagles that just fell apart a few years later. There was a lot of atrocities committed that we've all sort of forgotten about now. And there's Norse that are bumbling along in the second grade, who had a lot of great supporters who were just lost to the game. And I run into people even today that say, look, I really used to follow rugby league when Norse got eliminated. That was the end for me, so I have a bit of a casual interest, but nothing like it was back then.
Was the word merger used in the boardroom? Yes.
It was at a Group 14 meeting, and it was near the end of the night. And Mike Whitney gave an impassioned speech about how he would rather retire the jersey than see it adulterated with a merger. And, the vast majority of people in that room agreed with him. So it wasn't like he was, it wasn't like he was really changing minds, but he put it into words, what everyone else couldn't quite say. And I'll never forget, I've been in some rooms and seen some pretty passionate speeches, and that speech of Mike Whitney's was a good piece of talking.
I mean, I don't think at any time did the board actually say, oh, well, we should consider merging. I can't remember that conversation ever. And everybody stuck tight. And I think people would have rather seen the club go instead of merge.
We weren't going to merge. We were not going to merge. And I used to joke about that, it was a sad joke that all that remains is Illawarra is the Socks. There was too much history here and too much at stake, and so It would have been a sad memorial, but it would have been a testament.
In most situations, everybody has their price. In this particular situation, there was nothing that they could pay the Rabbitohs to merge with somebody else because it just wouldn't be the Rabbitohs.
We knew something that was there that we don't deserve to die. You know, we're the first club and we're supposed to be there to the end.
I will not be a part of a merger. Like, I don't care what they offer.
George and I ended up not being friends particularly, but I'll give him real credit. He was...
Honest to God, I've got to be quite serious. I hope the bastard's rotten in hell.
He was the personification of the bloody-mindedness that we all felt, as in, you know, and I think again, you talk about, this is playing out the public stage. News Limited, as a company that's in the public relations business, could see that there is no way in the world this man was going to go, you know what, fair enough, we'll go quietly. They picked the wrong guy, they picked the wrong club, they picked the wrong sport, they picked the wrong idea.
It's like tying your leg up and putting you in a sprint race. The thing is that the clubs that have gone very well in this criteria have been the clubs that have been funded by News Limited. Funding for us has been very hard.
Well, there was the first case, which neither Mr Hughes nor Mr White were involved in. It was the injunction application, which we ran urgently to try and stay in the 2000 competition, because we were kicked out in October. We went forward to the court. We said, we're ready to compete. We've got money, we've got players, we've got a coach. Make an order that pending the conclusion of the proceedings, which were going to be long and arduous, we could still play.
We would meet in Nick Pappas's office and we'd gather there, we'd have a briefing, and each day we'd walk to the court. And we'd walk through the streets and we'd have our red and green scarves and hats and whatever, and we'd walk along, and all the building workers and cars and taxis, as we walked probably half a mile to the court,
That's right.
people were cheering. It was like we were going off to war, and that's basically what it was.
You know, I was in the court and it was fantastic to walk outside and the whole street full of people and clapping George.
We walked into the court, we looked round, and there were South jerseys and big rabbits and people with scarves, and you know, I mean, all that went out the window, and the judges didn't say a word ever.
Sometimes you're lucky to get a seat in there. It was interesting to see the way everything played out. And you know, when there was fibbies being told.
It was not smooth sailing and there was a lot of shit thrown at us. Nick was one of those people that just seemed to take every setback or every problem in his stride.
We had a legal team of about 4 or 5 people, a QC, a couple of barristers.
That was one team, and News Limited had 30 teams. So it was like the Rabbitohs playing 4 or 5 Roosters teams at once. It was just a monumental challenge.
And we came in and we got tipped off beforehand, seeing it was a case with football, it was something different, that there would be no formal attire. So we all turned up and our legal team just had suits on. We were all sitting there with just a normal gear, and they all marched in with wigs and gowns and everything else. And the judge said, oh, well, we won't have that gear. So they all had to turn around and take their gear off and come back.
It was every day. You know, so I helped Nick take his books in and, you know, push the trolley, or not that I knew much was going on, because I left school when I was 14. And
Tugger was, you know, like a Mexican bean jumping all over the place in the courtroom. Sit down, Tugger, it's okay, sit down, wait.
I used to say to Nick some days, how was today? You know, he'd go, oh, good day today, and you know, not so good this day. And
First day, first bit of argument, Richard White on his feet, opening address, which was going to go all day. Tugger taps me on the shoulder within about 5 minutes of it commencing. Can I talk to you? I said, just a second, Tugger, wait. At the adjournment. Comes up 5 minutes, can I talk to you now? I said, no, not right now. Just wait a bit and I'll turn and come and see you. 5 minutes later, how about now? I said, okay. Turned the chair around, wheeled it up to them, said, what is it? He goes, are we winning?
was heartbreaking, gut-wrenching. He felt like tossing in there a couple of times, and I'd say can't back out now. If George had backed out of the fight, it would have been all over.
You had to be realistic and you had to think, well, hang on, we don't have the money to take on a media giant like Rupert Murdoch. What do? Do we just lie down and cop it?
We needed the funds, as I said earlier, because we needed to pay the lawyers.
Australia-wide, the public are behind us.
Do the supporters, other than the Souths fans, want them back?
That's the plan, that we'll have to raise a lot of money.
Suddenly you knew who your friends were, and these were people who also thought that the Souths were probably their second favourite team.
The very next day, the Johns boys were in the newspaper announcing that if South were reinstated, they'd consider playing for the Rabbitohs. And if it was the Herald or the Telly, but it would have been the Herald, I'd say.
If the spirit in the room tonight is any indication, the court case is looking good. Cheers, fellas. Geez, we got to a lot of people, you know, and we staged all sorts of events around the place.
We're here for the same cause, Sean. We're here to get South Sydney back where they belong, mate. That's back in the competition.
Every dollar counted. You know, people donated money from their pensions and so forth.
I remember standing at the door to greet the VIPs, and people like Brett Kenny and Hazem or Masri were turning up, and I was apologising and saying, look, sorry, your name's not on the VIP list. And Brett Kenny and Hazem, their answer was the same. We're not VIPs, we're just here to support the club and help.
Do you think the competition this year has lost something without the Rabbitohs?
Yep, definitely.